Hey guys, this is Kevin, and today I'm going to be talking for a few minutes about renting in the Philippines. I've mentioned the cost of renting and some other things in other videos, but I'll go into a little bit more detail today. And bear with me because, as always, I have some notes just to make sure that keep my train of thought and cover everything that I want to. So first, let me tell you how you would find a place. You can look online, but I think you'll find that the better deals are found the old-fashioned way. If you can have some idea of where you want to stay, find out where some of the nicer subdivisions are, where some of the nicer rental areas are, and you just go there and walk around, and you'll find signs that people have hung up, and it will just say, two-bedroom, one-bath apartment for rent. Call, and it'll give you the number. And I think that's how you're going to find most of the places. I looked around for online classifieds a few times, but every place I rented in the Philippines, I just knew about the place somehow or found it through more old-fashioned means. If you find a place online, you may be able to get a good deal, but a lot of times those types of places, I think I've mentioned, are the online advertisements are more real estate companies or some type of agent. So you end up with a middleman or something like that. And generally, you're probably going to be better off just renting from an individual owner who rents out his or her property. So find out the general area you want to live and just look for signs, because that's the way people usually do it. As I mentioned before, the sweet spot in terms of cost for rent is usually going to be between $200 and $300. That will usually get you a 2 to 3 bedroom apartment that's pretty nice, pretty comfortable. If you have a family and you want something bigger and you have the money and want to go up to, let's say, $800 to $1,000 a month, you can rent something really nice in the Philippines for that. If you want a house or something that's substantially bigger, you can find it, and usually you can find it for a reasonable rate compared to the U.S. So what you want to look for is something that's going to cost between $200 and $300 most of the time. In terms of security deposits and leases, most places are going to ask for about 2 to 3 months in advance for a security deposit. And it kind of makes sense because if you think about it, the landlord does not know if you're going to leave. And if you leave and run up a huge electricity bill or something, they really have no recourse. So I never really had a problem with paying 2 or 3 months advance. That's kind of the standard deal. You may be able to negotiate that down to 2 months in advance or something like that, but that's kind of the way most landlords are going to do it. In terms of leases, usually what I saw was a 1-year lease. And speaking of leases and security deposits, if they ask for more than that, I definitely would not do it. If they ask for either 6 months in advance, then the problem there is you don't know if you could ever get that money back. So I would not deal with that. I also had a landlord, this was back when I was in Manila, who after 1 year just gave me this insane lease of wanting more security deposit, wanting predated checks. If someone asked you for that, I would not deal with that. I didn't have a peso checking account anyway, but the reason I never wanted to deal with predated checks is, what if you have to leave for some reason and they try to cash the checks anyway? Even if the money's not in the bank, what if they come after you for bouncing checks or something? I don't know how likely that is to happen, but basically, I would just do the 2 to 3 months advance rent. For your lease. That's one reason that I mentioned that you need a healthy startup fund to get started in the Philippines. Once you have found someone and they show you the lease and they're showing you around the place, you may want to check right quick and make sure the water pressure is okay. I've never had any problems with that, but in some areas that can be an issue. In terms of utilities, You also want to make sure that your place has its own meter, and you may want to ask and make sure that the landlord will cover the previous tenant's power bill. They'll usually do that, but just check and make sure. So that's utilities. In terms of cable and internet, I've had DSL and cable internet, and I never really had a problem getting either one of those installed. This is going to depend a little bit on where you live, but in most of the cities, you can get some type of high-speed internet without too much trouble, or that's been my experience. So those are just a few things. You have to look for the place the old-fashioned way. $200 to $300 rent is going to be the sweet spot. You need to be prepared to pay 2 to 3 months advance. Advance rent as a security deposit. Do not get involved with predated checks or anything more than 2 or 3 months security deposit. So those are just a few things that we've covered so far, just to review. Okay, so once you're looking at the actual place, a few things to keep in mind. One, a Filipino style apartment is not going to have carpet. It's going to have tile. It's just something to be aware of. That's the way places are. You may have to, unless you get a furnished apartment. I've never dealt with furnished apartments, but if you have an unfurnished apartment, you may find that you have to replace, or provide things that you would not if you were renting a place in America. For example, the place that I rented in Angeles City, I walked into the bathroom and it was nice, but it had no mirror. So it is kind of a weird thing. So I just bought a plastic frame mirror, good size, at Ace Hardware, and that's just what I did. Or you may find that it doesn't have any light bulbs, or maybe not even light fixtures. These are things you can negotiate maybe with the landlord, but generally speaking, you're going to find the place is pretty bare if it's not furnished. So curtains, your appliances, stove, refrigerator, all those things you're going to have to provide yourself. The landlord is probably not going to do it, or at least that's been my experience. You also, when you're looking at a place, I should have said this sooner, but the main thing to look for, let's say the place looks nice, the rent is reasonable. The main thing you need to be aware of, number one, is how secure is this place. When I was in Manila, I would live on, fourth, fifth, sixth floor or higher, and you had a guard at the bottom at the entrance, and it wasn't an issue. But if you're renting something that's more of what we would call a townhouse style, they'll still call that an apartment in the Philippines, but if you're renting a house or a townhouse style or condominium style place that's, everything is pretty much on the ground level or maybe 2 stories, you really need something that's going to be secure. And just to give you an idea, my house in Angeles City, it really looked like a prison, to be honest. Every unit had a iron gate in front of it. We're not talking about the front door, but just to get into the front porch of every unit, it had an iron gate that was locked. So when I wanted to go in or out, I would need a key to my padlock just to get in there or to get out. There was razor wire all around the roof of the building. So fortunately, what the landlord had done is thought ahead of any possible way someone could get into that building. It was secure. So we're talking burglar bars, razor wire, and it may strike you as odd if you've never lived in the Philippines, but it's really a necessity. And especially if it's a place where expats are known to live, it's going to be a target for burglary. As I mentioned in the video on personal security, it is not that everyone in the Philippines is a thief. That's not true. Most Filipinos are honest, hardworking, hospitable people, but there are those there that are desperate. And so burglary is something that you have to be really aware of. So look at the place, make sure there's no easy way for someone to get in there. That's the main thing. You want burglar bars, razor wire, all kind of stuff. And if you're living in, you may be living in an area where that it's a little further out and away from the city, and you may not need quite as much. But if you're kind of living in an urban area, security is huge. You need to make sure that there's not an easy way for someone to get in there and steal your stuff. Okay, another thing to look to be aware of. Again, this depends a lot on where you live in the Philippines, but some areas are prone to flooding. When I lived in Manila, I saw that all the time. You'd have a good typhoon come through there, and the first floor for a city block is underwater. So you need to find out, is this area prone to flooding? You want to know what's going to happen to the area you're living in when a typhoon comes through. Is it prone to flooding? Do these windows leak? Uh, some of this may not be easy to find out, but as far as how the windows are, but in terms of flooding, you can usually find that out. Ask around and just make sure that your first floor is not going to be underwater in case a flood comes through. One final thing that I'll mention is noise pollution. If you live in a typical subdivision, it's probably not going to be as quiet as it is in the U.S. You're going to have roosters and dogs barking and that kind of thing. But what you want to look out for is an obvious sign that the place is going to have a lot of noise late at night, or even during the daytime in some cases. So, for example, if you're looking at a place and then across the street they're building a new house or a new building, then that means that for the next few months, you don't know how long, you're going to be listening to hammers and saws and that kind of thing, and that may be really miserable. Or let's say you're looking at a place and right across the street from it is some type of canteen. You may want to come back to that area at nighttime and see if they're doing karaoke, videoke until 3 a.m. Again, just things like that. If you can kind of be aware of who your neighbors are and what they're up to, that way you can hopefully at least be aware of whether or not there are people that are going to make noise until all hours of the night. I didn't have a big problem with this in Angeles City, but I remember it was funny. I told my wife that I was a magnet for noise pollution because when I moved into my apartment in Angeles City, I found out they were renovating right across the street. And fortunately, that didn't last for too long, but during the day it was kind of noisy. And then we had one neighbor that had some kind of little band, and they about once a week they would practice until about 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So fortunately, that was just once a week or once every 2 weeks, and they would stop at a reasonable hour. But those are the kind of things that you probably can't know 100% before moving somewhere, but just try to look out for obvious signs that this place is noisy. So anyway, those are just some different tips, some things that you want to keep in mind when you're renting in the Philippines. And hopefully this video has helped. If you have a question you want to ask about this topic or any other topic, just leave a comment below, and I'll see if I can answer your question. So anyway, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll do another video in a day or two.